Well, good evening. It is so wonderful to have you back. In tonight's video, I have compiled some stories having to do with vacations and the horror stories that can come along with them. So without further ado, grab yourself a snack, sit back and relax, and hope that tonight will not be your last. This story took place during the second week of Easter vacation in 2023, when I was 15 years old. And I want to mention as well that this happened at my mother's house. At that time, my mother had decided to renovate the kitchen because it was really outdated. So there was this blonde guy with blue eyes who came to start the work, which involved putting up plastic sheets on the walls and a divider in my living room, which is next to the kitchen. At the end of the day, I had to go to the dentist to pick up an impression, and my mother had informed the worker that we would be back in about an hour and a half. However, since the appointment was just to pick up an item, we returned after only 45 minutes. On the way back, my mother suggested getting kebabs and doing a good deed by dropping off the worker at the train station. When I returned to offer him a ride, I noticed he was very uneasy with a nervous smile, as if to say everything was fine. I insisted that he come with us, and he agreed. Along the way, he explained that his name was Brian, and that he was originally from Moldova. He also mentioned that he lived alone in Paris, but had 2 children living in his home country. We arrived at the station, dropped him off, grabbed our kebabs, and went home. After finishing eating, I decided to take a bath, as I love doing that all the time. However, this time, to my dismay, the water turned from hot to cold. So I spent 2 hours in lukewarm water, then got out and returned to my upstairs room. Immediately upon opening the door, I noticed that my PC was open and turned on to my lock screen wallpaper, even though I instinctively remember closing it before going downstairs. I asked my mother if she had been in my room or touched my computer, and she said no, that she had stayed in her room and was watching the news. After a quick search of my room turned up nothing, I decided to finally go to sleep. At about 5 a.m., I woke up sweating and shivering intensely, which had never happened to me before. I had a feeling of danger and that something or someone was nearby. So I grabbed a knife because, yes, it's a bit scary, but I have a passion for edged weapons, probably from manga. And I have a collection of knives, katanas, and shurikens on my bedroom wall. With the knife, I searched my room again but found nothing. However, the feeling didn't go away. So I locked my door and messaged my mother to see if she was awake and had the same feeling. But she didn't respond. I waited for 3 hours until I heard her walking in her room. She came to see me and explained what had happened that night. She told me I was probably just being paranoid and that everything was fine. She also warned me that Brian would arrive around 10 a.m. to continue the work, and that since she would be leaving for work, I would be alone with him. She assured me that I wouldn't need to go downstairs to let him in because she told him he had kept the keys in a woodshed next to the door. She then went to work and I went back to sleep, locking my door. I woke up at around 11:30, went downstairs to make food in the basement, and when I didn't find Brian there, I didn't think much of it. I went back upstairs and ran into him. As soon as I saw him, the bad feeling returned. But he started talking to me. I tried to end the conversation and quickly went back to my locked room. 10 minutes later, Brian knocked on my door, asking for help carrying something. I didn't respond because I really didn't want to see him again, but he started trying to open the door and began kicking it hard. So my first instinct was to grab a knife, lock myself in my bathroom, and call the police. I explained in a panic what was happening, and the woman on the line said she was sending 2 cars, which would arrive in about 10 minutes. While waiting, Brian managed to enter my room and began breaking down the bathroom door. I told him I had called the police and they would be arriving any minute, that I was armed with a knife, and that I wouldn't hesitate to use it. Upon hearing this, he stopped banging on the door and left. The police arrived and caught Brian as he was trying to flee. My mother immediately came home, saw me, and burst into tears, telling me that she should have listened to me. A few days later, the police called to explain that Brian was wanted for kidnapping, identity theft, torture, and murder. I believe that bad feeling I had during the night was him returning and hiding outside my room in the house, because he knew where the spare keys were hidden. But now he is in prison, and I hope never to see him again. So my family went on vacation about 6 months ago. We have 4 cats and we're leaving them with a sitter who is going to come twice a day to check on them and feed them. My dad had gotten a free indoor Ring camera from his job, so we decided to set it up to check in on them when the sitter wasn't there. The camera was set up at the top of a bookshelf overlooking our living room. You could see the entrance to my bedroom and bathroom from it, as our apartment is not very big. After the trip, we stopped using the camera but never took it down because we just forgot it was there. Tonight, me and my sibling were hanging out in our living room when they made a joke about us being filmed. Confused as to what they were talking about, they pointed up to the Ring camera, which had a green light indicating it was on. The light had not been on to our knowledge since we originally tested the camera before our trip. At first we assumed our mother was using it, since she was the only one with the connected app on her phone. Another note, this mother before the trip was against these cameras, and has always been super against invading either of our privacies. We are also full adults now. It would be highly unlikely for her to be checking the camera in the middle of the night. Once I noticed the light on, I said, "Those cameras are like super easy to hack." We both look up and the light shuts off. We took the batteries out and put the camera in a drawer. I don't think I really need confirmation to know that the camera was likely hacked, but I want someone to tell me I'm overreacting. I guess I'll have to wait until the morning to see if there's actually any way my mom could have accidentally checked the camera. So I was around 15 at the time, and my mom and dad and I were on a family trip to New York City. It was a really good trip at first. We visited the Statue of Liberty, Madison Square Garden, Times Square, etc. And for the most part, it was a normal vacation. But towards the end of our trip was when everything went to shit. It was our last day there, and we were trying to get back to the airport, so we decided to take an Uber. A couple minutes pass and a gray Civic pulls up on the sidewalk we were on. I remember noticing that he had Lyft and Uber stickers on his car in multiple places almost excessively. It kind of felt like he was trying to prove that he was our Uber. It was just a small thing, but looking back I really wish I took more concern about how sus this guy was. Moving on, we were running late, so I'm guessing my dad didn't really pay attention to the license plate because this guy was definitely not an Uber driver. He was a lanky man wearing clothes akin to rags and looked like he was drugged out, but at the time nothing seemed off to us. Again, we were running late and what happened was the least of our expectations. The ride was normal until we got to the airport. We all expected him to get off the highway and let us off. He didn't. Instead, he casually continued down the highway past where he wanted us to be dropped off. This was when my dad noticed that the man didn't have a meter or his phone set up with an Uber GPS open. We were starting to get worried and my dad asked him in a stern voice, "Excuse me, where's your meter?" The man stayed silent, flustered. He asked once more, this time yelling, Again, no reply. But at this point, the man started dashing down the highway, weaving past other cars and just driving very dangerously. We were all panicking. My dad was screaming at him to let us off. My mother was crying and praying with her rosary clutched firmly in her fist, and I was in shock. I froze up. I couldn't even cry or scream as much as I so desperately wanted to. I was completely immobilized. This continued for a while, driving down an unfamiliar road to God knows where, with the car only getting faster and faster. I started having those classic end-of-the-road type thoughts like, wow, this might be it, and there's nothing I can do about it. But luckily we were saved. I don't know if we passed by it or if someone in a car we passed had called the cops, but we soon heard sirens blaring behind us and we were being tailed at high speed by multiple police cars. One of the cops had a megaphone or something to amplify their voice and screamed out for the man to pull over. Obviously, he put up a fight, and the police had to actually cut him off for him to finally stop. The police helped us out of the car and got all of our things from the trunk while putting blankets around us and telling us that it was going to be okay and that we were safe. At this moment, I felt the biggest wave of relief wash over me that I've ever felt in my life. Don't get me wrong, it still messed me and my family up hard, and I was still left pretty traumatized, but I was at least glad that my family and I were alive and safe. The police gave us a ride back to the airport, and everything went as planned from that point on. But I am glad that I never had to find out where this guy was taking us and what he was planning to doing with us. Just thinking about it still gives me goosebumps. I guess the moral of the story is always check the license plate before going in an Uber. That feature on the app that tells you what it is exists for a good reason. Back in July of 2018, me and my 3 best friends decided to go on a vacation to Barcelona. The 4 of us were 18 at the time and had just finished our freshman year of college. For context, we had planned this trip for several months, but the lazy asses that we were took our time before booking our flights in Airbnb. We eventually started our search in May, and if you have ever been to Barcelona, you might know that it's already pretty late if you want to find an affordable and well-located summer accommodation. We ended up scrolling on several websites for days as everything was way out of our budget. One of my friends finally found this very decent studio located near the Rambias, a very touristy neighborhood. The condo was actually located on a narrow street that was perpendicular to the main Rambia. You had to walk about 500 meters until you arrived at the sketchier end of the street, where the flat was. It really didn't bother us, as the building was pretty secure. You had to open the first front door that led to the streets. Then you had to take the stairs to the second floor, where you had a second door which required another key. This second door led to 3 condos, so we had a third and final key to our personal flat. This final door did not have any outside handle, which meant that if we were to leave without our keys, we would end up locked out. There was finally no outside handle on the balcony door either. You could only open the door from the inside. The day we checked in, we were pretty excited despite our terrible exhaustion, so we decided to go smoke a cigarette on the balcony. The balcony next to ours belonged to our next-door neighbors, who were a bunch of Italian boys who we only met at this very moment. They had been pretty loud throughout the stay, but we've never thought too much of it. As last elements of context, our condo was disposed as follows. The front door led to the main room, which is where 2 of my friends were sleeping. The bed was on the left, and at the end of the room was the living room, which also worked as a kitchen and bedroom, where my 3rd friend and I were sleeping. We were there for 5 nights. As the young woman that we were, our daily routine was pretty consistent. We would go out clubbing every night, go home around 4 a.m., pass out in our beds, and wake up at 11. We'd visit the city up until 7 p.m. and then get ready to repeat. Our first 3 nights were awesome. We had some male friends who were staying in Barcelona too, so we'd meet up with them and it was fun. Yet the 4th night was rather creepy. We had gone home at 4 a.m., screwed around with my friends for another hour, and fell asleep by 5. At around 7:30, my friend, who was sleeping with me in the living room and who suffers from sleep paralysis, wakes up as she feels something tickling her ankle. She opens her eyes and sees someone crouching at the end of the bed, his hand on her ankle as if he was looking for something under the bed. At this moment, she is convinced that she's experiencing sleep paralysis again. But the fear makes her sit on the bed and shout. The shouting wakes me up. I see the guy too, at the end of the bed, and still half asleep, I whisper, "Edward?" I think I had been dreaming about a friend of mine and confused this guy with him. The guy gets scared, suddenly gets up, stares at us, and then tiptoes away, saying, "Oops." He walks back past the bed where my friends are dead asleep and walks out the front door. My friend and I stayed up for a long time talking about what we just experienced. Then we woke the other girls up and told them the story. We never knew how this guy broke into our flat. He didn't steal anything, even though we had left our credit cards, IDs, phones, and cash on the table. The only thing is that at night we did not lock the front door. But it was closed, so normally no one could open it as there was no handle, unless someone had a key. We chose not to talk to the police about it because of this, as they could have told us that we were responsible for not locking the door properly. We also chose not to tell the landlord for the same reason, but also because we didn't want to ruin our last day there. We tried contacting our neighbors, the Italian guys, went to their flat and knocked, but they never opened the door. Looking back at it, we should have definitely done something about it, and we shouldn't have stayed there for another minute. But we were too young, I guess. We could never figure what the guy wanted, nor what he was looking for under the bed. None of this makes sense, to be fair. Why would someone come to someone else's place uninvited to look for something at 7:30 while the occupants are asleep? I guess we'll never know. This takes place during the summer of 2019. I'm on vacation in a 2-story villa that my mother's friend owns. So with him, my mother, some of her friends, and I were staying in this house to rest before returning to work. After about 5 days of living there, they decided to eat at a restaurant, but I decided to stay at home. So after they left, I stayed downstairs eating my dinner and watching TV. I had at that moment a bad feeling because I watched too many documentaries about sociopaths and read too many stories here. I was like, with my karma, maybe something will happen. Also, this house had French doors, you know, the kind of big windows you can open and use to go in and out of. The most used was the one which had a direct access to the pool in the garden. So this is the context of where I was, what I was doing, and what I was thinking about. After eating, I decided to go upstairs to lock myself in my room and, as I always did, have your own bubble. But before that, I went to check the door in the front and behind the house and the windows. The problem is the door was open, but as I said before, it was something normal here, so I didn't think about it too much. Then I checked the windows. One was open, but I locked it and went to my room. After entering my room, I called a friend of mine to have someone to talk with. After about an hour, she couldn't hear me anymore as if I didn't have network. This was weird because during my 5 days in this villa, I never had problems like this. So I started to panic because I had no one with me, nor my phone or my laptop were functioning, and weird noises could be heard. About 10 minutes later, I heard some people talking downstairs and my mother yelling my name. So I went down to see them, but I was really shocked. I was the only one to have the door's key, so how did they enter the house? I asked and they told me. I'm gonna quote this in French because the sentence is more clear in my head. Bah, heureusement que tu as laissé la porte-fenêtre de la piscine ouverte, sinon on serait toujours dehors, vu que tu as fermé la porte. Which, my best translation means, you closed the door, so we would still be outside if you didn't leave the window of the pool open. The window of the pool open? I'm thinking they're referring to the French doors. I'm sure I closed it. I remember closing it before going to my room. Up until today, my mother still doesn't believe me and thinks I was just paranoid. I didn't meet anyone that night, fortunately, but I am sure someone was there, and nobody can make me doubt that.